How's it going, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Hope you had a great Merry Christmas. I'm joined today by Jake, aka RyanCam20. He does his own movie review YouTube channel, and for the first time in a long time, we're reviewing a movie on this channel, and it is a newly released Iron Claw, the movie about the tragedies that have bestowed the Von Erich wrestling family. This is the first time I've gotten to do a movie that's freshly released. Normally we do kind of classic sports movies on this channel, but this was too good of a chance to pass up between me and Ryan Cam, our huge wrestling fans. You've seen him on my wrestling vlogs before, so this was just a match made in heaven. So Jake, hope you had a great Christmas, and looking forward to doing this, man.
Yeah, it was a great Christmas. Thank you for having me, Phil. This movie's going to be, it wasn't exactly the feel-good movie of the holiday season. This was very, very dark, but I've been looking forward to discussing it with you because I'm very familiar with the Von Erich story going into it, and you're familiar with it as well. And now that we've both seen it, we can just do a deep dive into it, get into the nitty-gritty. So I'm looking forward to it.
The way I've described this movie to people that have asked me about it, they're like, hey, what do you think of this wrestling movie that's out? And I tell them the story is a very sad one, but it's one that deserves to be told, is what I've been telling people. And I think that's a good way to go about it. But the other thing with a movie like this, too, is we've heard whispers in the wrestling space about movies being made about wrestling that never see the light of day. Mm-hmm. Like the Chris Hemsworth playing Hulk Hogan movie, that's been a rumor for like a decade now at this point. And if you ask Hogan or Hemsworth, they'll both still tell you, like, oh, that still might happen. You never know. So when the rumors of this first came around, where it's like Zac Efron's going to be in it and stuff, I'm like, okay, maybe we'll see this one day. But this almost came together quickly, in a sense, which was kind of surprising. And I guess the good place to start with this is the MVP of this movie that people might not know is Chavo Guerrero, the actual wrestler, Chavo Guerrero Jr., former Cruiserweight champion, among other things, was basically in charge of the wrestling behind this wrestling movie. And he's kind of the wrestling guy in Hollywood now. He started with Glow, the series on Netflix, and basically anything with wrestling or fighting in general, they go through him. So I think it's important. You see him on camera very briefly. We can touch on that later. But people will get their flowers for being in front of the camera in this movie. I just want to quickly give flowers to someone behind the scenes that people might not know had a big role in this movie taking off.
I remember when I started watching wrestling, it was my first wrestling show I ever watched, period, was WrestleMania 25. Chavo was technically on the show. He was pushing Vicky Guerrero in the wheelchair for the three-way for the world title match.
Right.
But then he got into this never-ending feud with Hornswoggle, or like every week it was like Hornswoggle embarrassing him in some fashion. They had a boxing match where Chavo had these massive gloves that he had to wear, and it was just never-ending. And he was always involved with the guest hosts, and the guest host era of Raw was just not fun.
Right.
In hindsight, it was like the dirt worst for a time. But Chavo Guerrero and Wrestling Bios, this YouTube channel, has a great series called Reliving the War. And I've gained a new respect for Chavo Guerrero because where he started in WCW to where he ended up going with the crazy gimmick with Pepe, the hobby horse, and that whole thing, then Misfits in Action and that whole nine. So, yeah, Chavo Guerrero deserves every bit of respect that he gets. I mean, he was in Lucha Underground, which he killed it there, of course. Yep. So, yeah, he is very, very much the last of a dying wrestling family because, of course, Eddie Guerrero is sadly no longer with us. Rest in peace.
Right.
And yeah, it's like I said, last of a dying generation. So it's good to see, because what wrestling we do see in the movie is quite good. And obviously the actual meat and potatoes in the ring stuff is not the focus. The family is the focus, as it should be. Mm-hmm. But what we do see of it was very effective. There's a moment in the movie where Kevin Von Erich is facing Harley Race, and Race gives him a suplex onto the concrete floor, and there's a whole thing in which it just knocks the wind out of Kevin, and he's selling it, he gets back in at 9, but for a hot second he's like, oh, and it's just like he sells like just like how you would fall on a concrete floor. Like, I need a minute, but he doesn't have a minute. He's in the middle of a wrestling match
Right.
with the heavyweight champion of the world, so he can't take a breather. He has to roll back in there. So Chavo just went above and beyond in the choreography department.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought up that suplex in particular because I think one of the biggest hurdles to get over in a wrestling movie is how good is the wrestling. When I do a football movie, you got to talk about how good are the football scenes and so on and so forth. That is the part I would show somebody if you were worried how the wrestling would be. Because, like, so when we went to see it, there was maybe 10 people in the we went like middle of the day on the Friday before Christmas. So like we picked a good time to like because I didn't want anybody like bothering me in this movie. I wanted it to be I didn't want middle school kids running around the theater. Like there would have been another suplex on the concrete if that would have happened. But luckily there was like 10 people, you know, everyone was really invested in the movie, but that suplex knocked the wind out of Zac Efron. It knocked the wind out of the audience. Like you felt everybody just like stiffen up at that moment. So that, like you said, is just a good indication on how well he was with that movie. But let's back up just a second here because you kind of touched on this. It's going to be known as that wrestling movie, but this movie is almost nothing to do about wrestling. I think the overall theme for this movie is I think brotherhood is number one, but you can widen that to family overall. And then my third thing I said is kind of meeting expectations because I think these brothers felt an obligation to their dad, to their city, to keep that promotion going. And I think it's just one of those, you know, meeting expectations can sometimes, while you're well intentioned, it could not be the best thing for you to be doing is trying to meet the expectations of certain things. So those are the three overall themes I think meet this movie pretty well.
There's so much to unpack with like what you just talked about. I think what you talked about with brotherhood, I might as well start with that.
Yeah.
And we'll touch on this with the with what was left on the cutting room floor and what was like what wasn't.
Mm.
But how I describe the story to people who ask me what's this Von Erich movie about, the Von Erich family had 6 sons, 5 of them died, 3 of them by suicide. So tragedy is just woven into this family. It is just baked into the cake. And there's
Right.
even something that I learned literally today. David Von Erich was married. It's never addressed in the movie, but was married.
Right.
He had an infant daughter, but she died in childbirth, or well, when like
while being delivered.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm.
And so there's the whole discussion of the Von Erich curse, which I think is a tad overblown. I think there's at least a kernel of truth to that, but you got to remember that it's like they're human beings, and Von Erichs had a lot of problems with drugs and other things, and we'll again touching on that a lot later.
Right.
But the common theme that this movie did so well was just how close all of these brothers were, not only in bad times, but in good times as well.
Mm-hmm.
I love the scene where Mike Von Erich is in his band and he has to go do this gig, but the parents are like, "No way, you're not doing it." Smash cut to Carrie, Kevin and David helping him escape out of the house with Kevin's future wife Pam to get him to the gig, and just seeing them hanging out. And then a couple scenes prior, they were on the river, they were just chilling, they were having burgers, they were drinking beer together. It was just it wasn't narrated to us. It wasn't like these guys are brothers, they love each other. You were shown that through their actions.
And that
there was also
scene with them at the table when he explains, "I have this gig with my band," and the dad doesn't want to do it. Not only do they help him do it, they're psyched that he gets to do it. And I think what was really important about that is they very quickly crushed the like, these wrestlers aren't meatheads. Like I understand they look like Greek gods, but like they have real feelings and other interests. They even mentioned that their dad Fritz, you know, was musically inclined. He just kind of gave it up because there was no money in it where he was in the world. So like, you know, Carrie, they mentioned, was going to be an Olympian before the United States pulled out of the Olympics in 1980. So these are just well-rounded individuals and not just meatheads. And like you said, they didn't have to like, by the way, these guys are smart. They just showed you that they were.
Yeah. And another thing that connected these brothers together was their kind of weird relationship with their father. Now, Kevin Von Erich has said in interviews that he loved his father, he was a good man. However, if you look a couple layers deep, you kind of realize Fritz Von Erich was not, he was kind of toxic in certain aspects.
Right.
Now, toxic masculinity is a buzzword, and I hate that
Sure.
buzzword. Like, it's been overused, it's
Mhm.
been beaten to death. Fritz definitely had some like toxic traits about him. He definitely was living vicariously through his boys, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of I was never NWA world champion, but now all of my sons are going to be NWA champions, and at
Right.
least Mike is like, how do
All
I
of us?
tell him
You
that
sure,
I don't?
Pop? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a common thread of yes, they love their dad, they want to make their dad proud. However, there was not necessarily a prodding in that direction, but more like a you're wrestlers now. You're wrestlers now. And
Which
so
is funny
again,
because when Kerry comes back after the Olympics is canceled, he's like, Kerry, I have an idea. I think you should join your brothers in the ring. I've never pushed you guys to be wrestlers. I always gave you the opportunity to be your own man. And I'm like, but did you really? Like, what was their other options? I'm like, I mean, this is the thing with wrestling families in general. It's like, yeah, had they chosen to do something else, they weren't going to be disowned. But how do you grow up in that life and not want to do it for the most part?
yeah, because in many respects, like you look into Fritz's life, even before wrestling, he was into football, and they do
Yeah,
bring it up.
you're
Like,
right. He
but
played for SMU. Yeah,
he was legitimately in SMU, and then he tried it at pro football. Then it didn't work out for him, so he went into wrestling. So
right.
literally, wrestling is like the only thing that this family knows. And so
Yeah.
it wasn't a case of them being on a bad choice road. It was literally like the only road that they ever truly knew.
Mhm.
Like Mike tried to veer off of the road, but it didn't work out for him, very sadly.
Right. So you mentioned the dad being a little harsh, but like, so and you said Kevin mentioned, in a recent interview, like he loved his dad very much. He didn't push them for this. Kevin didn't even get involved in this movie until it was pretty much done. Like he didn't get to control the narrative on how this movie got made, but towards the end of it, they brought him in and said, "Hey, is there anything here that you really just this isn't right at all?" And he didn't have anything to say in that regard. So I think that's a good example that at best at worst that their dad is probably a little manipulative, or at least is shown that way, and at the best he's just fair and firm. You kind of exist somewhere in the middle of that. So jumping to him as a character and stuff, let's talk about favorite and least favorite characters. Do you put Fritz in like a least favorite character uh, topic, or you don't think he deserves it quite that harshly?
I wouldn't go quite that harsh. I feel like he's definitely the antagonist, but
Mm,
this movie is really good because I don't think there's really a true bad guy in it, and I'm glad that the movie didn't go that route.
right.
It's just a series of it's a snowball effect.
Mm,
One just leads to another, and it leads to another. There's no
yeah.
true bad guy in this movie, which I am so glad that they did. They didn't do like
Mm,
a Colonel Tom Parker route, what they did in the Elvis movie, which I don't
mm.
hate the Elvis movie. I
No,
liked
it's
it,
pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah.
but it's clearly obvious that Colonel Tom was the bad guy and he was a shyster if there ever was one. But that's a
Mm,
whole nother story for a whole nother time. Everybody in this movie has their moments of I like you, but I'm not so sure about that particular choice. I think the pure good guy, the one we all sympathize with by a mile, is Kevin.
sure.
By a lot.
I like Carrie. I think it has a lot to do with who plays him, just because I like that actor and seeing him in Shameless. Like you've seen him down in the dumps and come back, and it's like you just expect him to do it again, just based on who he's playing. But so when I came up with like our script for this, me and Jody went to see the movie together. So I ran a couple of these by her. So I'm actually going to steal her choice for least favorite character because it's surprising when you hear it, but then their explanation I thought was perfect, so I wanted to share it. She actually went with their mom as their least favorite character because their dad is firm but fair, and the mom is like the least motherly person. Like when Kevin goes to their mom about, Carrie's in a bad way, she just looks up and says, "Figure it out between yourselves." It's like they weren't arguing. It's not like you guys are adults, figure it out. He said Carrie needs help, and her answer was, "You guys figure, it's between you guys." So like her unmotherliness, or the way it's depicted in the movie, she was maybe a wonderful mother to them, and probably still, but the way she's depicted in the movie makes her that way. I'll say this: I'm glad she wasn't the stereotypical wet blanket sports wife that just doesn't get, married into this life and wants nothing to do with it. It's like, well, you kind of should have figured that out 5 kids ago, So at least she's not that, but she's just kind of in the background. There's not a lot to her, and this is a movie where you're trying to get a lot of people's characters out. So I think she kind of falls by the wayside overall.
You know what? I agree with that. I agree with that because, again, she's not a bad person, but like you said, the scene you referenced, like when I heard that for the first time, I was like, how old does she think that her kids are? Like 6?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like they're not like having a fight in the sandbox here. Like,
yeah, it's not Kevin stole my cookie. He's going through some mental trauma right now.
Yeah, Kevin's nearly 40. At the time of Carrie's death, and this is a little bit of real life, he had just been indicted for cocaine possession. He was about to go to prison. So it's like he's got stuff going on.
Yeah.
And Dottie's just like, he'll be fine, when he very clearly wasn't.
Right. So that's I thought it was genius that she brought it up that way. So I wanted to share that. So I will put her, and maybe unjustly so. Maybe it's just the way she was depicted. But I definitely have to put her in that scenario. One more character topic here I wanted to bring up. Obviously, the brothers and the family are the main characters, but we meet a lot of other people in this movie. Who would you say gets the winner for the most impactful side character of this film?
I don't know if we call her a side character, but I have to go with Pam, played by Lily James.
I think she just barely. I don't have like a criteria, like, oh, you can only be in this much percentage of the movie necessarily, but like she's in just a little bit. Like she's not in the whole movie, obviously. So like she's a great supporting character for sure. So I actually had 2. I have one that is blink and you'll miss it, and that's Lance Von Erich. MJF playing him. You literally see. I think he drop kicks somebody and flexes, and then he's off screen. If there's one thing I hope for this movie when it comes out on Blu-ray, whatever storyline they had for him, I hope is in the deleted scenes. I hope we get to see what that was. For those that don't know, after several deaths in the family, they try to kind of make up a long-lost brother, cousin scenario with someone who's not related to them at all, named Lance Von Erich. That's who MJF is depicting. MJF, of course, the current AEW champion. And again, he's blink and you'll miss it. But I think that's something I hope we get the payoff of what that was. And I kind of get why they cut it out, but I also don't, and I'll explain that part later. But my other really impactful side characters, they're later in the movie, but when Kevin's sons, who are, wrestlers themselves these days, when they're 8 and 10 or 6 and 8, however they all are at the end of the movie, there's some really good scenes with them just being with their dad and stuff. And they're just being kids, but in a movie that beats you up as much as this one does, it's a much needed pick me up just seeing some kids be kids.
That scene literally like crushed me. Like it was just it was like it was so like it was such a relief to see, because it and Kevin drops the line of, "I used to have 5 brothers, now I'm not even a brother."
Right.
And then like, "We'll be your brothers, Dad." I'm just like,
yep.
Or just breaks.
Yep.
It just breaks.
Absolutely. And again, a much needed pick me up in a movie that just does nothing but beat you up for sure. So let's we did favorite and least favorite characters. Let's go with favorite and least favorite scenes, whichever one you want to go with first.
You know what? It's gonna sound a little weird, but I think my favorite scene in the movie is Kevin's wedding.
That's great. I like that. Them dancing. The line dancing is great. Yeah.
I've watched that clip like 50,000 times. A24 released it on their social media, and I'm like, I've watched it like 5,000 or 6,000 times. Like it's just, it's nice. And then shortly before that, you see the whole thing with David throwing up in the toilet, leading to his untimely demise.
Right.
And just and it's not lingered on too much. You don't see him dramatically throwing up into the toilet. You
Right.
just see Kevin walking in, and then David's like on the floor, and you just see the remnants of the toilet. And I've
Right.
worked at a movie theater for 3.5 years,
Hmm.
so I've seen some stuff in
Yeah, two
toilets.
two and a half myself. I got some years in that service as well. Yeah, I
But
agree. It wasn't like, yeah, clearly, like, if you're Kevin, you can think, oh, he just overdid it drinking at my wedding. Like, you don't know necessarily how bad it is yet, so you can still enjoy that scene for sure. But
but then when Kev says I'm gonna be a dad, and David's like, "Oh, that just makes me so happy." I'm just
yeah,
like, I love that scene so much, and just it breaks your heart knowing that literally soon afterwards, and the
mhm,
timeline's kind of messed around with in the movie. So, but
yeah.
we'll talk about that later. But
I'll actually just really quick mention. I'm sure people, if you're watching this, you've probably seen the movie. Otherwise, obviously, spoilers.
yeah,
You're gonna enjoy this movie way more if you don't try to timeline everything together, because it's
exactly.
generally right, but it's not completely right. So if you
It gets
just,
the spirit
it's in
of the
order, it's in
law.
the proper order, but the time in between events is not going to be correct. So if you
It
just
gets the
give them
spirit
that,
of the law
which
rather than
which
the
is a
letter
big
of the law.
thing in biopics anyway. That's something
Mhm.
you should not never try to do with biopics. So if you do that, you enjoy the movie a whole lot better. Please continue.
I was just going to say the timeline follows the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law.
Mm, definitely. So my favorite. Oh, and like, it's obviously, it was well documented that the main Von Erich brothers in this movie, like, they do all their own stunts. They learn how to wrestle to some extent. I assume that was them really line dancing, and I don't know if when they signed up for a movie about wrestling that they were going to have to, hit the boot, scoot, and boogie. But everyone did good for that.
I
Um,
mean, I'm sure with Zac Efron with his High School Musical days, I'm like,
yeah,
I was born to do this.
he's like, "Come on, guys, we're all in this together. Let's go." Like, if they would have snuck that line in at, like, he's dragging his brothers on the dance floor, and he's like, "Come on, we're all in this together." Automatic 5 stars. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
already
would have
pretty close, but I don't usually give star rating. It's pretty close to that for me, but that would have to put it over the top.
for
Um,
sure.
I equate this movie a bit to a Goodfellas slash Wolf of Wall Street, where you just see the ever loving high and then, like, the crushing, blow of it. The highs and lows, and the, like, at points, and it's remnants of what really happened in these guys' lives. You feel like you're coming off of, like, a high after a while when everything starts going bad. So I think the peak high in this movie is actually when they beat the Freebirds and they win the 6-man belts. I think that is, like, the moment you're supposed to feel the most happy for them. Obviously, one of the brothers wins the ultimate prize eventually, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I think the true happiness moment in the movie is, and it's supposed to show you, like, that was the peak of world class. This is like 1983 ish at that point. Like, it gets no better. At that point, they're syndicated. They're easily, because WWF is, or it's probably WWF at this point, isn't, like, they're doing great in New York, but they're not, like, they're probably for a brief couple months the number one wrestling promotion in the country for that brief couple months. So I think that's the ultimate high. So I think that's an important part to circle and be like, yep, it doesn't get any better than that. So that's up there for me. The other part is because they foreshadowed it so well. When David's about to make his in-ring debut, because Kevin, he's been wrestling for a little while, and he's trying to do this promo, and they keep having to restart the promo, and David's just chuckling in the background. He's like, "Get him out of here! He's making me laugh," or whatever. And then after his match with, I think it's with Harley, that Harley ends up winning after the suplex, like we talked about, and he's
Yep.
trying to, like, get a promo out. And I think the bigger issue isn't that he can't talk; he's just, like, out of breath and he's
Yeah.
scatterbrained. And then David just takes the mic from him, delivers a flawless live one take promo. We'll chase you back to Missouri if we have to. Just perfect. And that's the moment when you realize, out of all the brothers, he's the one with the gift of gab. And I thought that was a really great way to show that.
Well, it was well documented that David was the best promo of the brothers. Like he was the best. Like Jim Cornette, like David Manning, like Bill Mercer, like all the world class people agree that David was the best of the family. He was the
Right.
best wrestler, the best promo. He got experience working in Florida. After the fallout with Fritz, he went to Florida to work there as a heel
Yeah.
before coming back. So he got seasoning elsewhere. So David was seen as the best of the family, and the movie did a really good job of showing that. And I do agree with you. Like Kevin was just he was winded. Like he had
Yeah.
just wrestled Harley Race for
Yeah.
seemingly like 10, 15 minutes. And so like you can't expect it to be like on your toes like that. But David just is like next time you come here, it won't be so easy. And he delivered like one of my favorite promo lines ever, where it's like, it's not about Georgia versus Texas, it's about between decency and filth. And they switched it around in the movie, but I love that line. But that was a David line,
Right. And I think it's important to note too, like you said, it's not that Kevin can, it's just that's what David excelled at.
Yes,
and I think most
exactly.
people will tell you, the Jim Cornettes or whatever will tell you, David was the best overall, Kevin was the best pure athlete, and Kerry had the best look. I think that's
Exactly.
usually how the three of them are shown. So I think that was a good, and at different moments, it's obvious, like those are highlighted very well, I think, between the three of them. All right, so do you have a least favorite scene?
Wow. Honestly, the
And I want to real quick. I don't necessarily mean least as in you didn't like the scene. It could be like a tough scene to watch, because like it could be either way. I just want to make it known, just because you pick it doesn't mean it wasn't a well done scene. I just want to make that. I want to verify that.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I think in that case, I would have to go with the immediate aftermath of Kerry winning the title, which, I mean, timeline-wise, it was very much like not that. But then he gets on the motorcycle, and then you smash cut to him getting out of bed, smashing up the pills, like taking them, and then hobbling out to the kitchen, and you see his leg, and you're just like, oh, whoa, oh my God. Like I knew about that beforehand, but I'm just like, oh, well, there's a stump. There it is.
I had forgotten about it too, because it was kept a secret for many years. It wasn't common knowledge until several years after his passing. So like I had forgotten about it. There are probably people in the theater that if they weren't locked in at that exact moment, didn't even catch it. It was so subtle. They could have just been looking at him on the crutches and not, he's like next to the fridge. So it's like, oh, maybe they just didn't quite see it. Like it's almost a blink and you'll miss it, but you're rewarded for paying attention in that moment, I think.
Yeah, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart seeing because Jeremy Allen White just crushed it as Carrie. Like everyone gives Zac Efron all the praise, and rightfully so. But Jeremy Allen White absolutely did just as good a job. Like people bring up Shameless. I know him from The Bear, the FX
I
show.
watch The Bear. That's next. It's on we're rewatching Shameless right now, but I have Bear.
I haven't. Well. The only thing I've seen of The Bear is the speech where he gives in AA, where he's like, and then something just happened to me where and just this monologue, like where he just talks about how he had a strained relationship with his brother, ironically, and then just his brother committed suicide, also ironically, and then he gave him his restaurant. And so it was just, maybe Jeremy Allen White was tailor-made for Kerry Von Erich after all. But long story short, like the scene where he puts on like the boot for the first time and he's like trying to walk and he just like,
well, he's really trying to run and can barely walk.
Yeah, and he just yells, "Fuck!" I'm like, I feel so sorry for you right now.
So mine's also a Carrie moment. It's actually what I have written here, and it sounds like it'd be a terrible other movie, but it's just called Carrie's Home for Christmas. It's when he shows up and he's so like happy, and they reference that like he had won the Intercontinental title in the timeline, which again you're not really supposed to think about. He wouldn't still have it in December, but they just kind of like reference that he won it. They're not saying like, oh, the IC champ's here. He's just like, you won the second biggest belt in wrestling. Like, good for you, son. So like, I think they handled that as good as they could have. But it goes from hugs and kisses to he gives him a gift that he's really like excited and proud to give to him, that he for once has money to get him something. And then it just like a toilet flushes and the floor just falls out. And you're like, whoa, what did I just miss? What just happened here? And we've all probably had incidences on the holidays. So it was one of those turned up to 11. And I think it was just awkward. You wanted the scene to end and it didn't quite end yet. They talk it out a little bit too longer. And that is like the beginning of his final arc, I would say, with Carrie. Like
Yeah.
when you go back and watch it, that's all you're going to think of at that point. So just from a well done scene, but a very uncomfortable and awkward scene to watch.
Yeah, and I knew all about Carrie's like eventual suicide and how he gave his father a gun for Christmas, like Christmas in '92, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing that gun, I'm like, in the business we call this foreshadowing, but man,
Mm-hmm.
this is going to suck when it comes around, and sure enough, it did.
Right, right, definitely. So what? We've all obviously only seen this movie once. Usually, when I do these reviews, it's a movie you've seen 100 times over. So this is more of a what do you think, not what definitely is. What scene will this movie most be known for? Do you think? What's going to be the whether from a quote or just from the action? What's going to stick with you the most?
It's kind of tricky because there are several scenes that will stay with me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, wow. I think it's the and I've seen I've seen the gif of it where it's like like Kevin's just sitting in the shadows like just before he's about to go fight Flair for the
Mm-hmm.
world title.
Yeah.
I think that scene, like,
Okay.
because it's done so well to where he's lost two brothers already. Well, three if you count Jack, but
Yep.
like he's lost three brothers. Like he's basically like just shut himself off from his wife and from his first son. And so like he's sleeping in the sportatorium now, and he's just like he's at the peak of like like my family's cursed. Tried to protect myself with God, it didn't work, so I'm going to try and protect myself with wrestling. And
Yep.
so that little moment where he's in the shadows and he like just like is introspective, like
Mm-hmm.
that for me would be my pick.
And as you said, he's about to fight Flair for the world title, so he's at like the peak of his professional life, but at the absolute bottom of his personal life at the exact same time.
Yeah,
Um,
like his professional life is the gold mine, his personal life is in the shaft.
Absolutely. For some reason, the one that's going to stick with me, and it's like it hasn't been out of my head since it happened. Um, when Kerry wins the title, the NWA title, the belt that's over my left shoulder right now,
Mm-hmm.
the you don't see it, you just hear the call of it, right? Um, and I don't think you even really see much of you see a little bit of the celebration in ring, but you don't get that moment like their dad Fritz mentioned so many times, like, I never got to win this belt. I've wanted this belt in our house for the longest time. And you never really get to see that moment. What you do see is a dimly lit kitchen with Carrie and Kevin and the belts sprawled on the kitchen table, and it's the emptiest feeling in the world. Like this should be the greatest thing that's ever happened to this family. And there's a little bit of relief. Like Carrie even says, like, I'm glad, I was able to bring this into the family, but it does not feel anywhere as good as you expect it to feel. And I think that emptiness just stuck with me for some reason. That just like, this is all Dad ever wanted, and it's here, and it's it doesn't last very long. I think he's champion for 18 days or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
like,
because
and
in real life, Carrie had a bit of a relationship for being a really swell guy, but
mhm,
being flaky.
yes. So and then I'll go into details on his reign.
Yeah,
But it's just like that. If this movie's made by a different company, that's actually where the movie ends, and it's all sunshine and rainbows. He wins it for his brother, and thanks for coming to the movies. But instead, it's 2/3 in, and it's just this empty, hollow thing that is going to stick with me, I think, for a long time.
yeah, and like you said, there are a lot of parallels for like say Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street, where it's like at a certain point, it's like the highest of highs, and then like I would argue that like as soon as David dies, is like the plane is heading into the mountainside.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Let's pick up slightly more positive one here. This one's a little harder, I think, for a movie like this, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyway. I like to put this in there. Uh, what piece of memorabilia would you want from this movie?
From this movie, I would because I've actually watched and on YouTube there are select matches from the David Von Erich Memorial Show.
Right.
They don't show the whole thing. It was cut up for a world class wrestling, like their television show.
Yeah, they cut it down for time.
They showed 3 of the matches, but one of the matches was Flair versus Kerry for the world title.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd like to have a program from that show. Like if they sold programs, I'd like to have.
I imagine they did if it's in Texas Stadium. That's a good one actually. I'm a huge belt mark. Obviously, you can see the ones behind me. Yeah. I own 2 of the belts in this movie. So to get away from that part of it, the scene where they're coming down to win the 6-man belts, and Kevin and David are essentially in tag team gear, and Kerry's kind of doing his own thing, and he's wearing this white and red ring jacket. And I think I would love that ring jacket because he just stands out. He's kind of new to the team still. And I don't know why. Just in that moment, it's like, look at the family and look at, like, they're a team, but they all bring something different to the table. So I think I might go with that.
Yeah, well, David was known as the Yellow Rose of Texas, and he would always bring a yellow rose to the ring, and so like he would like throw it out to the crowd, and so
which I was very disappointed. I'm glad you brought that up because we were going to go into maybe things we didn't like or would fix. Not only does he not do that, it's never referenced. They didn't put the yellow rose on his jacket. It's just a weird thing to admit, in my opinion. Like this movie's really well done. It gets a lot of the little things right. That seems like an obvious thing to not get right. It's like if you made a movie about The Rock and you never called him like the people's champ or something.
See, I think we're both burdened with knowledge and that we know a lot of the story intimately. And so like thinking about the movie, I'm like, okay, they got the spirit of that right. But I also know that's definitely not Ric Flair. That's some guy like who threw on a blonde wig and thinks that he's Ric Flair. He's more like Richard like Floor or something. Like it's just like there are these little details to where the normal like casual moviegoer would be like, oh, who cares? But for the two of us, you're just like, yeah, I would have run that through a couple more times.
Yeah. I actually had a coworker ask me about the movie today, and I was like, there is a chance that if you like the movie in general, you may enjoy it more than me because you're not burdened by the little things that they got wrong or just little like the timeline stuff. Like I said, that doesn't bother me at all. I do think the Kerry motorcycle accident, they could have done a little more to not make it seem like the same night. Because that's basically like that's like the one thing I'm like, give me like a day in between, so it's obvious it wasn't at that exact moment. But you touched on it. Let's go into it. In biopics, you're going to have main characters that it really matters who plays them and who portrays them. In some cases, the side characters, as long as you get the concept, you're pretty okay. Like the Harley Race guy, I'll give like a B+. Like he sounded like him when he was in the ring jacket and doing the promo. I'm like, yeah, that's Harley, absolutely. And then when he's in the ring, like he's got the beer gut like Harley had, no shame there. But he had no definition in his arms and his shoulders and his neck. And he just looked like a guy playing a wrestler in that moment. But didn't bother me too much. The Flair thing, because that's what most people are talking about. Like when he's like in still shots, you kind of get away with it. But in motion, not great. You almost didn't mind it in the ring because it's just a guy that remotely looks like Ric Flair. I actually thought the guy killed it in the post-match scene. When he's like, oh, where do you get fucked up in this town? And he's wearing the belt and he's already cracked a beer. Like, I thought he was fine in that. So really, if you cut out the opening promo and just like maybe show a clip of him cutting a promo with no sound, just over like a narration or something, I think you save that. The hair could have been better for Flair. It wasn't like permy enough, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. But people, that's been the biggest drawback I've seen people say. I've seen no one even mention the Harley Race character. So I think it's mostly the Ric Flair. It wasn't enough to hurt the movie for me, but it was definitely noticeable.
See, I didn't mind Harley Race in the movie. I thought that they got the look down. Like Harley Race, he had like the diving headbutt, and he had like
Yeah,
all these things,
the
and
suplex.
so that as well. So I feel like the actor who played him did a very, very serviceable job. I did not care for the Flair portrayal at all, and it's like
Yeah,
in the ring and afterwards, where he's like covered in the blood and he pops the beer and is like I'm going to the Holiday Inn, like
yeah,
that was Ric Flair.
yeah. It
Like
works fine.
in the promo is like some dude like trying to be Ric Flair.
Yeah,
Like Ric Flair has a very unique promo style. Like, you see this watch? This is Rolex time, Tully Blanchard. Woo! Like, very unique. Like, there's
you're hired.
only one Ric Flair. So it's already at a bit of a disadvantage, but I just did not buy this at
And they
all.
tried to squeeze in like the "my shoes cost more than your house" part, and that was
Which
in no
wasn't
way
even
what
a
he.
Texas thing. He did
No,
that
not
in Mid-Atlantic.
right, not at all. It's just they wanted to throw it in there. He looked to me like when you go to Spirit Halloween and like they don't have the rights for the costume, but they make the costume anyway. So instead of saying like Ric Flair on it, it says like stylish professional wrestler, and it's basically what he's got going. Uh, so the Harley race again, I would have had Trevor Murdoch just do it if you could get a hold of him.
I
He was
mean,
trained by Harley Race. When he came out at NWA 70 in Harley Race's jacket, I'm like, dude, perm up his hair, he's ready to go. One thing I think we were burdened by here is this was being made when Flair, I guess he wasn't canceled because he's still around, but it was right after the Plane Ride from Hell, Dark Side of the Ring. If this
yeah.
movie was made like 2-3 years ago, they could have just used Ric Flair. Like, just playing himself.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, grand scheme of things, like that's all well and good. My biggest, like, what were these people thinking, was not including Chris Von Erich. That was the one where I was just like, dudes, like, you all know that there's another Von Erich who was a wrestler. Bless him, he tried, but it
Yeah.
was like it's never in the cards for him. Like he tried, but just he had brittle bones, he had asthma, he was addicted to the same pills that his brothers were. Like, he went to throw a drop kick and his arm just completely shattered. Like it like bead. It was just so gross. And he wanted to be a wrestler so bad that when he couldn't, he ended up committing suicide himself. He was 21 years old. I thought that would have been cool because you have Mike, who doesn't want to be a wrestler, but ends up being one anyway because of David's death. And then you got Chris, who
wants
wants
to
to be, but
Yeah.
can't. I thought that would have been an incredibly unique dynamic there. But I mean,
I agree.
and I've seen an interview where Sean Durkin, the director, said there's already enough tragedy. I didn't want to include any more of it, which, I mean, I see the wisdom there. Don't make it a Darren Aronofsky movie where you just question every decision you've ever made.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm like, Chris Von Erich is literally a human being that existed. So I was like, I don't know. It was a weird choice.
So before the movie even came out, Chavo Guerrero got interviewed from Chris Van Fleet, who does fantastic interviews with wrestlers and MMA fighters and whatever. And they touched on that because he had already seen the movie. He went to the premiere. And he's like, I'm not going to say what, but they leave out a big chapter of this family story. And Chavo says the same thing. Like, it's like the quote from Invincible, a man can only take so much failure. A man can only take so much death in a movie, let alone death by suicide. So, like, I get it. I get people being upset by it as well. I did hear that, like, they kind of made Mike, some of his personalities they took from Chris. Like, him getting injured in the movie off the dropkick, as you already mentioned, that was how Chris got injured. Mike actually got injured trying to take an Irish whip, and someone just popped his arm out of socket. So they used
Hernandez.
Yeah, they used Chris's injury. I think the musically inclined thing was more of a Chris thing. They kind of combined the two brothers, which sounds bad when you realize these are real people. So I get that concept of why they didn't do that. But my biggest problem with this movie, if there is any, between that and the not talking about Lance at all, this movie was 2 hours and 12 minutes.
Yeah.
You're not pressed for time. Give me 20 more minutes. Like, give me the Lance thing. Talk about Chris for 10 minutes. Like, if this movie's 2:45, nobody's mad. You got a half an hour to play with, in my opinion. I don't know what, like I usually am the one telling movies like you could cut this out, that out. It's the same movie. This is a rare case where I'm like, buddy, you got 30 minutes that no one would be mad at if you told there's a lot. You're going through 6 major players and like a 30-year period. Like you got the time, use it. I think that's my biggest complaint, which is a good one to have, is when I just wanted more of the story being told. And I again, Chris obviously isn't mentioned, but I hope the land stuff is mentioned, in the deleted scenes off the cutting room floor. Yeah, that's my biggest thing is for some reason you thought you need to stop at 2 hours and 12 minutes. You had a half an hour to play with, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just it's not a deal breaker for me. I kind of understand. Right. And Mike's story is already tragic enough. Like the scene that just again is a scene that no one really talks about is the press conference after he gets out of the hospital from toxic shock syndrome, and he's there, but he's not really there. And he's like, I'm gonna get back in the ring. You're gonna see it. I'm just like, wow. I feel so sorry
I'm sure you've seen it, but for those watching, if you watch the real press conference, it's pretty much the same thing. They actually captured that pretty well.
It's so sad to watch. The real version in real life that happened was just even worse because you got Kevin there, you got this doctor there. He's there is like Mike's promoting like his return at the Cotton Bowl. Yeah. And then you got like Fritz popping in there like, be sure to see the show. I'm just like, who signed off on this? I know
it's like who. When they interview a UFC fighter like 38 seconds after he got knocked out, it's like, would you give the guy a minute? Go talk to the winner first, then talk to this guy. But it was a little bit like that. I have a few little plot points that I want to talk about, and then I have a small rant at the end. But I'm gonna, if you have anything else to throw in, now is the time.
Yeah, like I said, I feel like they left a little money on the table with the Lance Von Erich stuff, and especially considering that MJF was a producer of this movie. Maybe that was a choice. Maybe that was a choice of his. I don't know. Maybe he was like busy with AEW commitments, so maybe there was just a thing where like he just couldn't. But I'm just saying.
My understanding is the stuff was shot, like it was made. So, but maybe not all of it. Who knows?
The Lance Von Erich stuff is endlessly fascinating. I guess that is my point. I mean, just the fact that Fritz Von Erich is like, I'm just going to make up a kinfolk from someone literally who lives here. I'm just like, Fritz, I know the internet was not around back then, but someone's going to catch on to this at some point. And they did. And
what I find ironic, too, is, when in Fritz's heyday, he was his character was like a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer, one of the two. But then he comes to Texas, where he played college football. Somebody had to have known, like, that guy's not German at all. And when he had that character, he had a brother named Waldo Von Erich. And in this fake Lance thing, Lance was supposed to be Waldo's son. So they kept the kayfabe of it going. Hats off to that part of it. But truthfully, I think it needed to be included because when they finally came out and said, he's not a Von Erich, like, they kind of lost the trust in their audience, which was their final death note, I think.
Yeah, it was just very, very, very odd. But I think that's all that I have. If I have anything, I'll probably just bounce off of you. So by all means.
Great. All right. So first one, and you tell me if this is crazy or not. I think everyone did a great job in their roles as the Von Erich brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would switch Kevin and Kerry. Because Zac Efron's look is a lot closer to Kerry's. And while I think Jeremy White did a great job, Zac Efron is almost too buff for this movie. Like, even in a movie about wrestlers, he looks like he's from another planet.
I was listening to Salamonster Soundoff's review of the Iron Claw earlier today, and he brought up something very similar to what you're saying. So I get it because like Jeremy Allen White is like 5'7" or 8, and like maybe not even that. And Kerry Von Erich was 6'2", so I get it.
Yeah,
and I certainly don't want to diminish Zac Efron because he absolutely crushed it. I think there's wisdom to what you're saying there. I don't I don't agree as strongly as you. I see where you're coming from.
I do think they were given the right roles for who they can act as the best. They just don't look the most like who they're portraying. Like, I think Efron being like Kevin and his like soft nature, I think he did that better than maybe Jeremy White could have done, because he's used to Between the Bear and Shameless. Like, he's a really talented guy. I almost hope he doesn't get typecasted as like the problem child in a show at this point.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
One thing that's really important to note, this may be the thing they got the most wrong considering how important it was. Kevin sells World Class to Jerry Jarrett, and Fritz is pissed about it. In reality, the exact opposite was true. Fritz sold, and Kevin took a long time for him to forgive him.
Yeah.
And why they did that the other way, it was just simply untrue. They didn't benefit from doing it the other way. It made Kevin look like, I'm doing what's best for my family. You didn't blame the guy, but it just made Fritz look. It would have been a nice little like babyface turn, pardon the pun, to be like, no, it's time. We got to do what's best for our family. And then they all moved to the ranch with Kevin and them. So I just think that was something that was incorrect for no reason.
Yeah, because I was that was a little weird to me too, because I remember I've watched and rewatched the Triumph and Tragedy of World Class Championship Wrestling DVD that WWE put out.
Too, yeah.
And Kevin literally said, I didn't trust Jerry Jarrett. I didn't trust Jerry Jarrett. I didn't like him. And honestly, you could make an entire movie about Pro Wrestling USA, the whole like alliance between the AWA, WCCW, and the Memphis group. And I think that'd be compelling as hell. That just led up to Super Clash 3 and the cluster that all was.
You could honestly Jerry Lawler movie, straight up. That needs to be one of the next ones here.
I am with you on that. Not a huge Jerry Lawler guy, but
when Kevin says, I don't trust Jerry Jarrett, that's fair. Yeah. I just want to put that out there too.
Well, but yeah, it's like it was weird that they did that. It was like finally like leaving off the pressure, and I understand that, but it's like like study your history and you'll understand that Kevin Von Erich was not a Jerry Jarrett guy.
Right, not at all. And when they first said like Jerry's offer still stands, I thought Lawler before I thought Jarrett for some reason. I don't know why, because I know ultimately when they shut down, they do the unification match and Lawler beats Kerry for the belt, and then they turn it into whatever they turn it into.
USWA.
So that's why I thought maybe that was Jerry Lawler. Him making an appearance in this, I don't think would have been out of the question either. That might have been, maybe it was just hard to do considering, I think he had health. He was probably dealing with his health issues when this was being shot or whatever. Okay, so real quick, here is going to be my small rant. I mentioned earlier, you can see the belts behind me. I am a huge belt mark. So I just want to quickly touch on what I thought they got wrong, turns out might be right, and then one massive misuse of belts in this movie. Clearly, the NWA belt by Harley Race, perfect. The big gold belt that Flair had, also perfect. Both are behind me for reference points. And really quickly here, we're going to screen share. Facebook. Okay. So here we got just the Iron Claw first thing. Jake, can you see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. So the people can see it as well. All right. Yep. So the belt that they show in the beginning of the movie that Zac Efron wins is the Texas Heavyweight Championship. That particular design of the belt was never won by Kevin. Funny enough, the first brother to win the Texas title was, in fact, this is what the belt, this is what it looked like when Kevin eventually won it. Big difference there. Yeah. But David was actually the first to win the Texas state title, I should call it, out of the brothers. And it did, in fact, look like that when he won it, but not when Kevin won it. They ultimately took that design and turned it into the tag team belts that the brothers won several times. So while that belt was at one point the world title, they should have used the other design if they wanted to show when Kevin won it. So that's one small thing. Here's the big deal. When they won the six-man belts, they used the WCW version of those. And as you can see by this bottom photo, nothing like the belts that the brothers actually won when they were. These are the Texas versions of the WCW NWA 6-man tag belts. Not the ones that they depict. Those are most famously known to be won by Dusty Rhodes and the Road Warriors. So I just
I
wanted
did
to
not
quickly,
pick up on this.
yeah, as the big belt mark that I am, I just wanted to quickly touch on some of those. I gotta say the belts looked fantastic as far as quality. In
Mhm.
other movies about boxing or MMA or other wrestling movies, sometimes the belts look really cheap. I thought these look fairly good for my opinion. But I did want to quickly just touch on the belt stuff. And I don't get to talk about wrestling belts that often on the channel anymore, so I wanted to quickly throw that out there. So I
No,
think
I see where you're coming from there. I honestly did not pick up on that until just now.
because the 6-man belts, like I said, when I see them, I first thought of, oh, that's the Dusty Rhodes Road Warrior ones, and then I was trying to find a picture of them with those belts, and it doesn't exist because they did not have those. So that's what kind of put me down that rabbit hole. So we did a pretty good job covering the script that we put before us. Any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
It's like I could talk like about the timeline stuff and the inaccuracies, but really, at the end of the day, it does not matter. I have a short list, and Phil, you touched on it near the beginning. Like, there's a short list of wrestling stuff that we would like to see turned into movies. Like, there's been an idea bouncing around of like Pedro Pascal playing Eddie Guerrero. I wouldn't mind seeing that.
I'll go right now. Let's go.
There's an idea of a Benoit movie, which no, dear God, no.
I mean, I think you make the Eddie movie, and you can somewhat tell the Benoit story in the Eddie movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's all you. I think that's what you do.
Another story I'd like to throw in there is maybe the Hart family, or if you want to go more micro, the Montreal Screwjob, because I mean, you could make like an entire like Christopher Nolan-esque style of narrative around the Montreal Screwjob and the build up to that.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I would much rather see like if this sells well and this is well received. It's well received in the ratings at the moment, like the ranking or the star ratings or whatever. I think a Hart family movie about Stu, about Brett and the screw job, about what happened to Owen, it could kind of be in the same vein as what we've just watched.
Yeah, but I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that this is one of the best wrestling movies that I've ever seen. And again, timeline altering aside, it ultimately doesn't matter. I feel like this movie captured the spirit right. It told this story because this is a tough story to tell because of just how tragedy is just baked into the cake of this poor family.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they did about as good a job as any, like trying to tell this story in a way that doesn't come across like in bad taste, like celebrating the family while also highlighting all of the things that just that like made them notorious. It was a precarious balance, and I feel like the movie did just about as good a job as you could ask for.
So I think before this movie, the championship belt of best wrestling movies would have probably been held by The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. There's a few other contenders, but I think most people would give it to that. Do you think this dethrones that movie as the best wrestling movie ever made?
Well, you got to remember The Wrestler is like a work of fiction. Randy the Ram Robinson does not exist.
Very true. Good point.
So I think in terms of based on true story wrestling movies, as like slim, like
There's not a lot of those, yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the best one. Now, if there are more, like if we get that Hart family movie, or if we get that Montreal Screwjob movie, or if we get that Bruiser Brody movie, I'd love to see a movie made about him.
Mm-hmm.
Or honestly, you could do like a Wolf of Wall Street type movie about WCCW, like about Gino Hernandez getting involved with the mob and his untimely demise and the missing link and like Devastation Incorporated and that whole thing. Honestly, you could do something like that. But as it sits right now, best ever based on true story wrestling movie ever made.
So we mentioned it at the beginning. The only other wrestling movie that's even remotely discussed right now is the Chris Hemsworth Hulk Hogan thing. Am I crazy that I wouldn't even want to see that?
No, I don't want to see it either.
Where do you stop? Like, do I just see Hogan slam Andre for the 80 millionth time? Like, do you get into the NWO stuff? Like, where do you where would you stop the Hogan movie?
Honestly, like Hulk Hogan uses lies like artists use like clay or like
Mm,
watercolors. It's just like, where do the truths end and the lies start?
right.
So I feel like if you do like Hogan as like an unreliable narrator, then sure. But at the same time, I'm like, I feel like it's just never gonna happen.
You would almost have to do it like the Weird Al Yankovic movie, where it's so off the wall that it's obviously not true, but it's depicted as if it is true. That may be a funny
Like
way to do that.
like you actually see Hogan playing with Metallica or wrestling 370 days in a year.
Or being the spokesman for the George Foreman grill.
Exactly.
Right. But other than that, guys, I think we're just about done here. Appreciate Jake, RyanCam20 for checking this out with us today. He's also going to do a video separate to this about some of the inconsistencies in the movie. He doesn't quite have a timeline for that yet, but I will put his channel in the description. Please give him a sub. Please check him out. And he does non-wrestling, non-sports related stuff. So basically any movie that comes out, this guy basically lives at the movie theater. So if you're curious, if you're curious about a movie that's coming out now, his channel is for you. So, Jake, appreciate it again, man. Hopefully we do another movie on here sometime soon, wrestling or not. I'd love to have you back.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you guys for listening. Enjoy the movie. Go see it again if you haven't. I'm going to wait impatiently for that Blu-ray, and hopefully there's some deleted scenes in that. But otherwise, thank you guys for listening, and have a good one. Take care.